wrapped up looking at your images. I could say, a street photographer, I think, was noted in the book. Capturing a slice of life, a documentarian, political and social commentary, rights activist photographer for the LGBT community, and photojournalism. Um, but I wanted you to define what it means for you to photograph people.
Okay. Well, I think behind a lot of those tributary descriptors is the reality that I'm a portrait artist. And so, in a sense, it all begins there because I don't really do plants. I don't do nature. I do it when I'm with my lover of 41 years and we
Mm.
hike. I'll just take pictures almost meditatively, but I really have no intention of making them part of my personal body of work in a way. It's more of a just it's almost like uh, diversion from the human condition. Basically, I'm always interested in people. I always have been. I think I grew up in a household that was very snapshot enthusiasts, and so that informed my way of looking at the world as it could be photographed. I think when I came through the college circuit to study motion pictures, I realized pretty quick that still photography was a more tangible way of making income, and that motion pictures probably would never secure income for myself. so so I did stop. I literally stopped making films probably in the early 70s, mid 70s. And I don't regret it. Part of it was the machinery was so clunky back then, and then literally no sooner did I stop that all of this acceleration happened around. The equipment became very nice, but I had my trajectory was really set in place by that time, and that had a lot to do with hitting Castro Street when I was 19 and kind of becoming part of that movement and that trajectory in history.
Yes, I know. I read that you actually started a film festival, the Gay Film Festival on Castro. And that must have been exciting times to kind of get you. I guess it was your Super 8.
We were all Super 8 filmmakers. Yeah, there was one guy that was showing historical 16 millimeter films in another venue, and he was part of our group. But really, at the end of the day, we were trying to display our personal work versus curate exhibitions of pre-existing
Mm,
LGBT content.
mm,
He did do that separately, but then we kind of did this other thing, and then this other thing did mutate into a festival of curation of films from all around the world with LGBT content.
mm. What was it like working at Castro Camera? You were young, what, 19, and you came from New York, where Harvey Milk was from as well.
I did become a customer first, and I was still doing Super 8s when I first moved to Castro Street in 1974. And I came down there to figure out where I would be processing my Super 8 film. And I really liked the energy of the place. Both guys were super friendly. At the time, I just thought it was, they were very affable. Apparently, I was being cruised and didn't even have a clue. But we became friends, and it was a super fun place to visit. And there was a lot of networking happening almost immediately upon moving to Castro Street, whether it was going to poetry readings, for example, or potluck dinners with the creative community. Um, we started a film group, we started a still photo group. I was involved with theater companies. So it really was for a 2019 something initially, and then I turned 20 in December. Uh, it was just such a great boon. And then Castro's camera was this sort of magnet. It was funny because I did have this perfunctory reason for being there to drop off my film, but I became part of a constellation of people that basically gravitated the place and to the place and hung out there
Mhm.
just because it was so fun, and it was political people, it was creative community, it was all kinds of people, and we would just sit around and chit chat, and it was always encouraged. Nobody had to rush out the door because there was plenty of sitting areas, and so I like that. And then and I think it was sometime in that first year is when we thought in terms of displaying our work for the community versus just making the work in the community. And um, let's see, where was I going with that? Oh yeah, so I was a regular, and w- about a year later, literally to the month August, I was walking down Castro Street because I lived one block north of the is that north? Well, anyway, I lived between 19th and 20th, and they were between 19th and 18th. And I walked by, and Harvey signaled me in with this very serious tone in his voice, and he said, "Hey, we need to talk to you." And I thought, okay, wow, this is strange because normally it was all joking and stuff. And he said, "Look, I'm going to run for electoral office again, second time. We need an extra pair of hands in the store while I do that, and why don't you come work for us?" And so I was blown away because I didn't see it coming. Of course, I desired a job there because I was doing all kinds of shitty jobs at that point just to be in San Francisco. But this would be a type of job that would be crafted for my creative trajectory, and so it made sense to, of course, you know, say yes. So, and then I worked on that second supervisorial campaign and all of the ones that came after as a personal friend and a volunteer, in addition to having those 40-hour a week uh,
Mm.
parameters, which were, answer the phones and direct people to him or Scott, the manager, and
What was it like working with Gus, Van Sant?
well, I love Gus. I had met him earlier than that moment, and even got to shoot stills on a little movie clip that he was working on. And then I think one other time he rented my studio for a project he was doing, and I got to just be there hanging out, and I took pictures of him and his friends. And so we were friends already by that time. And um yeah, it was so strange because I did also meet Lance when he was crafting the text for his screenplay,
Mm,
very separate. I don't think they had chosen Gus at that point.
mhm.
He was just advancing the script. So I helped on the content of that just by telling my story. The script got accepted to be produced, and then they asked Gus, and Gus was the perfect choice in a way because of his previous filmmaking and
Mm, mhm.
just kind of somebody who would come at it from a more grassroots place than, say, some of the other candidates that were being considered. So I was happy about that. And then when they were in pre-production, they definitely wanted to kind of pick my brain, continue to pick my brain, and kind of, let me know I was welcome there on set. But it was still to be determined whether I would be able to take still photographs on set. And so that was a very difficult situation because it's all union and I wasn't in the union. And so
Oh, yeah.
they found a sort of loophole which had to do with you could come on as what's called a special, and then basically you're as though you were an assignment photographer for a magazine, and then you're allowed to come on set, even though you're not union, and you have a number of a few days where you can photograph. And so they said, look, why don't you come on in that capacity and we'll see how it goes. And so I did, and they allowed me to pick whatever days I wanted off of the shooting schedule, and I had, I think at that point, up to 5 days allowable. And so that was great. And it was a real learning curve for me because I hadn't shot digital yet, and that was required. And so and then once it just kind of became organically correct, if you will, for me to be there,
Mm,
because I think, in a sense, because I had been documenting Harvey's life,
mm.
it would be metaphysically correct for me to be allowed to continue to do that in this manifestation of it. And I think they all understood that existentially, but there were these sort of formalities that had to be complied with. And one of um, uh, the hurdles was the fact that there was a union photographer on the set, and he really took a shining to me and basically mentored me and just basically made it possible for me to be there more than the 4 days, because he didn't sort of say, well, okay, now this special photographer has to go. He's this guy was like, yeah, let's see how it goes. and
Yeah.
and, and it was difficult because he has to get his job done, and so I had to defer to that basic perfunctory aspect, which I never had a problem with and always did do. And then I also had to learn the ropes in terms of the needs of the technical aspects, which is, you never go on the sight lines of the actors and so on and so forth. So that
Oh,
was,
right.
yeah, it was intense. So, and then I ended up getting to stay for all 10 weeks. So that
Oh,
was
nice.
10 of the best weeks of my life. So it was very exciting.
This is kind of a question that's outside of photography. The Twinkie defense. When this is going back as you as a young photographer, um, did you feel or think that this kind of summed up the homophobic society you lived in at the time? The Twinkie defense. I mean, how did that impact you? Just as you.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly was a replay of uh, the kind of miscarriages of justice that we knew existed in history. But then when it happens to your friends and they are the victims of uh, violence, it really does kind of waken you a little bit to
Mhm.
the gravity of that. Like, wow, can this even be possible that a jury of 12 people gave this man 7 years? It just was really sort of stultifying. So I think for me, I'll never, it's wrapped up in my trauma of loss of Harvey's death, you know. And so, it's so interesting because, of course, I'm a big peacekeeper. In reality, I'm not really militant in any way. Um, and so one of my sort of arrivals was that it really was, I don't know that I could ever forgive Dan himself, because he did seem to be politically motivated.
Mm.
Um, but I always felt really compassionate for his family, and that even though his wife kind of stood by him through thick and thin, his children were really not. Their lives were uh, thrusted into chaos, even post-mortem for after he died. And I
Mm.
just always felt like, wow, I mean, that's a child of a person, of a situation that is, not unlike me, like me being sort of the protege of Milk, having to endure this type of trauma. So too did those kids. So I don't know. There's always two sides to a story, really.
What was your most memorable day or days of shooting on Castro?
Well, it would have to be the second annual Castro Street Fair because that literally was my first day of work at Castro Camera. That was a coincidence, and,
They were welcoming you to Castro.
I had gotten the job 6, well, earlier, I'd have to reconstruct the dates, but I went away for the summer to my family's home, uh, to have my deviated septum corrected surgically. I had gotten hit with a hockey puck when I was a kid, and so my mom had arranged the surgery back in Utica so I could restore myself in the luxury of their home where I grew up, and I was scheduled to go back to San Francisco to begin my job at Castro Camera, and but I did what I normally did on the college breaks, which was I stayed the whole summer in my parents' in back in Utica. And so when I came back, which was the day before the Castro Street Fair, they were like, "We almost had to give your job away because the shit hit the fan on the campaigning and we're organizing the street fair out of the store, and you just got back. We held on for dear life to give you this job, and we were so close to not being able to do that because it's so friggin' hectic." So I got to the store that day of the street fair, which is normally a closed day, and they were organizing it. It was pure chaos. And I got there, but I didn't know film prices yet. So Harvey just handed me 3 rolls of slide film and he said, "This is your job today. You go out and you document the fair." And so it was really, in a way, my first freelance gig. So here's I'm being paid a day's salary, and it's to photograph drag queens and theater people. So what more could you want, you know? And I got some beautiful shots, including the one that's on the cover of the book. The faggots are a fantastic shot.
Yes.
And I didn't know those guys yet. And that shot really had a long history of its own. And so to kind of meet those people and photograph those people in that household that they're in the doorway ends up becoming a very significant household in my own, you know, familial development in that neighborhood. And so it's really kind of a very charged thing for me that day of trying to work a camera store, but not be and then later that night, well, not that night, but I mean, at night, we got the slides back a day or 2 later, and we projected them in the store windows so people could pass by at night and see the street fair photos. And that was really cool for me because I studied film and multimedia, and so it was kind of a way to sort of also have my work be appreciated and known. It felt like my career was definitely going somewhere.
You have a couple photos, at least in this book, about a homage to Diane Arbus. So I assume that she was somebody that inspired you. What did you like about her work? What of her work inspired you the most?
Okay, so well, that goes even a little further back to high school. And what happened was I fancied myself a filmmaker and a photographer in high school as well, although mostly focused on filmmaking, but I did do pictures for the yearbook. And I really liked the theatrical in life. I grew up in a theater setting, basically, and my mom was a former showgirl, and she was always putting us kids into talent shows and stuff. So, and of course, then there's the instamatic moments all throughout our childhood. So, it I have a natural sort of longing for the theatrical in life, right? So I go to New York City to see a Broadway play on a high school trip, And my teacher, who was kind of a mentor at the time, there was a small group of teachers that watched out for us, um, uh, basically off grid kind of kids. And they encouraged us to do creativity and watch movies and have critiques of the movies and go to plays and that kind of thing, do multimedia. And so they they had read one of those uh, fiery press pieces about the Arbus posthumous exhibit at the Modern, and they thought, well, hey, this sounds fascinating. It's really just, people were very excited by that moment after she had killed herself, and this was this body of work that we were going to have from now and forever about all these people off grid who we would never know about if she didn't go there.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
so I'm 19 at that point or thereabouts. They take us to we go through this gallery, it's very crowded, and people were super buzzed about this show. And I'm walking through this gallery and it's all these sort of eccentric people and theatrical people and carnival people and then all of a sudden, there's queer people. There's the women who are trying to pass as men, there's the transvestites that are showgirls. It's all that. And I'm closeted at this point. And so I'm like, oh my God, there's my people.
Yeah.
And so it was really kind of a turning point in a way. And so then I wanted to make that kind of work, and that's how that happened. And I understand that she's very complex in terms of um, hindsight, and I've sort of followed that narrative because I always wondered, well, why did I just adapt this so readily? I mean, I was very impressionable. So and then I kind of developed my own version, which I would have to characterize as softer because she had that direct flash, and she almost kind of really sought out to make people a little startling, which never was that that wasn't really sort of my goal in a way. So, but her work still feeds my soul. I don't know if you noticed, but they did a recreation of that seminal exhibition to the letter recently, and they also published a catalog of it. And the catalog is comprised of a lot of the critical discourse that came out of that
Mm.
show. And so
Mhm.
it's really this aggregation and this brilliant compendium of that moment in time when she left us that magnificent body of work. And so and that also becomes part of my narrative in the sense that I'm shooting with a posterity goal in mind. You might see me shooting something that is not really meant for the, the contemporary discourse, like whether it's too radicalized or something that's just, a delicate matter, whether it's drug addiction, whatever.
Mm.
You, I'm still sort of thinking, okay, well, somebody needs to document this particular human experience and condition, and it's okay to document it and not think you're ever going to do anything with it because you know that you're a vessel at that point where you can be a listener,
Mm.
an interpreter. You can kind of use your tools to be the person that maybe will be the that will help the the messaging that's innate there to come forward and kind of help people or not. So it just I think that kind of I don't know when we got attacked in the ballot box by Anita Bryant, I think a lot of us got politicized as youngsters that we had number one, we had a mission to help teach people about how we lived our lives as LGBT people, and to let that be the determining factor of whether or not they would um, help us co-create a better world for LGBT people, and that is in fact what happened.
Mm.
And so sometimes the pushback like hers was, even though people got hurt from it, there were lots of gay bashings and that kind of thing at that time. It really kind of got us off our asses and politicized us, for lack of a better word. So that seemed to be nested within my development as an artist.
You have images here too that you don't have of people, and that kind of struck me.
Mhm.
And it was the one that is the crystal meth pipe and the meeting place, which yeah, and they're just kind of placed, it's towards the end.
Well, and also there's the vintage rainbow flag at the beginning, which is not a human being picture.
Mm,
There might be one or
yeah,
two
and
others,
also at the end too, there's the,
the
image
chairs.
that's all colored. Yeah,
Yeah,
with chairs that are empty. Yeah,
yeah,
so
yeah. Well, I had a kid when I was editing the book, even though Tony Norman was the editor, I still had my living room floor was covered with
mm,
printouts
mhm.
for 6-month period. You had to sort of tiptoe through them if you were trying to maintain the order. And I had a section that I called totemic. And I don't know why I chose that word because I don't really truly know what totemic means. I know it has spiritual connotation. Um, so there were things like that in that section, although the chem dependency stuff wasn't necessarily in that section. I had a whole other section about addiction because I felt that that was required for me personally, because that was part of my journey, my rite of passage through intoxication, which did, like most do, if you stay in the rite of passage and you don't pass through it, it goes awry. And so that I really wanted to have that without necessarily doing a self portrait. I wanted to, which I could have done, but I wanted to include it, and I because I think that is still an issue in the LGBT journey, and really any kind of youth culture is going to have that rite of passage
Mm,
issue, and so it was some way to maybe send a little smoke signal warning of,
mm.
this is so there is a person in the shot with the the crystal pipe.
Right.
So that person was using crystal. So
Mhm.
it's a real picture, but you can't really use the face in that moment because
Right.
then you're stigmatizing them. But yeah, I mean, I'm also a harm reductionist, so I'm not really an abolition. I mean, I'm how shall I say it? I'm not an abstinence only kind of guy now, even though I'm 31 years sober.
Mm,
So
mm.
there's a lot of subtext in the book about it because, and there will be in my studio book, which is what I'm working on now. There'll be even more because some of that played out in the studio where I finally just was like, okay, well, you can party or you can have a studio and you can't do both. So what are you going to do here? And so that's when I quit. And um, I stayed with the plan. I have a really great sponsor, and I just kind of was done. Like I did pass through the rite of passage, if you will. Um, and I think everybody has to make their own determinations. But I wanted to sort of leave a template that would be like the very last photo, ironically, is a 12-step meeting. The circle of chairs in the upper, it's in the very airy and beautiful sunlit room of the top floor of the LGBT center.
Oh, uh-huh.
And it wasn't a chem dependency meeting. It was one of the process addiction meetings that I was also attending. I
Mhm.
guess I can name the name. It was an Al-Anon meeting, I do believe. So, uh, but for me, it was more of a totemic thing because there was the rainbow flag was present in the picture. The empty chairs represented for me the people who would come together in community to solve all of the problems of their community. And so the fact that there's all these empty chairs is a gesture to the next generation, as if to
Mhm.
say, we kept these chairs warm for you doing what we did so that you could have a better world and did do, and that was accomplished. And now it's your turn. And that was why I ended the book with that. And so it wasn't an admonition so much as it was just an invitation to say, we've been keeping the chair warm for you. Now come on in. And that doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with drug addiction. It has to do with activation. And so I don't know, they're all the same to me. Like my activation is totally enmeshed with people's rite of passage through intoxication. I That happens to be my lot in life. I happen to be, hurt by it enough that I did something about it, and then I had skill sets to share and do to this very day. And so, and it really does seem to be a facet of the diamond of the LGBT community, but because of course we did suffer so much loss, um, even pre-AIDS, when you look at the 50s and the kind of abuse and blackmail and suicide and all of that stuff that was foisted upon our community, we have a definitely a layer of transformation that has to kind of be part of our own survival, and that's kind of what happened to me. And that, I took my cue from my elders in the 50s who did manage to survive and did manage to turn it around. And so I don't know, I didn't want to get pedantic with you, but it just is, you live every day of your life with this, particularly now with all the assaults in the ballot box that we're getting.
Mhm.
You kind of have to be, um, take the wisdom and try to do something with it.
There were some very striking images through the AIDS, the topic of AIDS epidemic. But what was it like to be a photographer during that time?
It did tug at me, but not for the reasons you would suspect. Basically, I always knew that I would make work about AIDS, and I was a late bloomer. I don't know really the true nature of that other than to say right in 82 when AIDS first hit, even though we now know that it was around for a few years prior,
Mhm.
walking silently amongst us. Um, m- my lover and I met in 82, and he whisked me away to the avenues in San Francisco. And so I ended up in this sort of domestic bliss and went back to college at San Francisco State and finished my degree, which I had interrupted to work at Harvey's Camera Store. So Castro Street became my university, and I never did get my papers. And so I went back, made my mom very happy and got my BA. But so I was preoccupied with that while my buddies were dying. And we did, of course, have sick friends in our immediate familial setting. And we were, as much uh, destabilized by the sheer numbers of people dying. But I didn't make work about it for a couple of years. And even then, it was very tentative. Like I wasn't sure what to say or how to do it. And then I met Miss Kitty, who really was kind of like, it gave me a proactive invitation, like, we're making work already together about drag and about theater and club life. And I invite you to document my journey as a person struggling with HIV. So it was a really clear opening of oh, well, then this is how it's going to be done. This is how I'm going to make work about HIV. I'm going to be in a
Mm.
caregiver relationship with this person, and our love is going to become deeply poignant as they get ready to leave their mortal coil. And that's exactly what happened. And it happened several times with several different people. So in the studio book, you'll see more of that particular narrative. So I think, and then of course, you don't really come plunk yourself down in the middle of a wake uh, with your camera if you're not a true insider into that setting. So that ultimately did happen, and I don't know, the sheer epic level of it all permitted that type of immersion, if you will, where I did do have, like, there's some wakes that were held at my studio that I did photograph. Um, so we'll talk about that more in the second book, where, a community space such as a photo studio becomes more than just a photo studio and that. So, and I think I've always kind of, now I'm involved with the Radical Fairies up here with their sanctuary up in the land an hour north. And, there's ritual and remembrance and all kinds of stuff that one could engage with as a trusted servant of that particular message. And so I do. And um, yeah, I think I'll probably will do until I stop, until I die. So that's probably a good conclusion. It's like I'm a shooter. I'll always be a shooter. But even though now working on books,
Yeah.
I can't do a lot of shooting. It's more about the what
Oh,
do I get down into book form before my memory goes.
you have this wonderful image of Allen Ginsberg. You apparently met Allen Ginsberg, and we're going to go talk about Ruth Weiss after this.
Yes, yes, we have to. She's probably not too far off in the distance,
No, she's not.
prompting us to remember her, which would be a great thing to do.
Yeah. So
Well, uh, what an opportunity to segue to her by talking about her nemesis.
yes, yes.
Yeah. So ironically, Marcus, the guy who is my boy with a hand grenade, is
Oh, okay,
was
okay.
Alan's lover. That's how I got to be
Okay.
close to lover to Alan.
Well, I was gonna
Um,
ask if Alan had any children or not. So, okay, I got it.
no, I don't think he does have any offspring.
Okay.
But he did have at the end of his life, he had a young lover in Marcus, and they were together for many years. And it's really not recorded historically yet. But Marcus had been working on a memoir, and some of my book work, the work in progress on my book was done in concert with his work in progress on his Allen memoir. So it really
Mm,
was kind of a close cousin in a way,
mm,
and I think he might still eventually end up doing that. But so he's a wonderful writer.
mm,
He's being very successful now with children's books, which he loves doing. And Alan was a strong influence, but a mixed bag, as you might imagine. Um, so when we were together for that 25 year of the Beats at the DeYoung, that whole thing jumped off with visiting Alan at his hotel room and referencing the young poet with the old poet, and I really loved that got to happen. It was very hard to pin them both down. So it kind of jumped off very magically, and I think it stands the test of time. And I did correspond with Alan one time after that. So, and I sent him the Diane Arbus photo, and he admired it in his correspondence. So that was nice. Um, and of course, as we know from Ruth's remembrances, she wasn't treated very well by a lot of the males from the Beat era, and and it really, it's a real tribute to her enduring spirit because she did not let it stop her. And as
Mhm,
we know,
mhm,
her life was as rich as theirs, if not more so. And she really is kind of a laureate in her own right, on not just the Bay Area level, but in a very universal sense.
mhm.
So, and I'm so thrilled that Melody's film just won an Emmy.
I
So,
won an Emmy, right?
it's so great.
How did you meet Ruth? Was that part of the Castro excitement, or where did you and where and how did you meet Ruth? When?
Yeah, well, it's funny because a couple times now you've localized things to the Castro, but you have to remember that San Francisco is this really rich bohemian enclave that's
It
citywide,
is. Yes.
that's hundreds of years old, and we're just mere mortals.
Yes, yes.
But so I remember out of the Castro, really, it was in the North Beach setting.
Mm.
I think we went to some to do at her home, or uh, I'm not sure what the first time was, but there was some gay boys from the Castro area, Michael Shane, who you probably know of, and then Larry Pete, who passed away from AIDS, and Ruth and Larry got very close up in the Mendocino area when Ruth moved away, and Michael was there too for a minute. And why Michael was from the Cockettes. He was the
Mm.
character called Mona Mandrake that Ruth did a duet with, a nightclub act that was the two of them. And so and then I photographed that, and that was kind of in a way the true beginning of meeting and working with Ruth because she's very driven, as you know, Kimmy,
Oh,
and
yeah.
she's like, you have been chosen, and she did that to you, and she did that to me. Why are you doing such extensive work with Miss Kitty, for example?
Mhm.
I asked myself that. And
Mm.
she basically singled me out and said, no, 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 you can't move on to the next project. We have a lot to do together. And that's kind of the same thing that Ruth does with people. And
Yeah.
so we were lucky in the sense that she did that with us, and Ruth was very loyal. Like, I would get the phone calls, and I would get the and it wouldn't be there would be zero uh um transactional agenda. She would call you up and she would basically say, I've been thinking about you. How are you? What is going on? Are you okay? And
Mm.
that was all throughout those several decades. And so that was really a blessing, that it isn't always about the trophy, like getting the good shot. It's something more. It's definitely something more. And of course it's really, lovely to have something to, enrapture into your body of work, but it really kind of isn't.
Mm.
It's not what we take with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is true bohemianism, which is admirable in and of itself, but then when they're actually authentically living it, it
Mm.
really kind of sets a template for somebody like me who's more inclined to be more, what do you call it, assimilationist. Like, I do have these middle class trappings, and it's just, I'm not going to ever be a
Yeah,
die-hard bohemian, but I certainly know what to do in terms of sustaining a certain spirit of that to make sure
yeah.
that I'm not,
Well,
out of,
that's it. That is
you
it.
know, another person than other than what I am.
Yeah.
My mom was definitely a teacher of that.
Yeah. Yeah, let's get hey, I didn't think about it yet. Just I know we have a little bit of time left. What was your childhood like? I didn't know that about your mom that she took the stage. Was she in
Mhm.
film as well, or what were your parents like? What was it like growing up, and did you have siblings?
I did. I have 3 siblings, and we were all kind of show business was foisted upon us by my mother because she basically left show business to be with my dad. And so I think for her to have children and then to, encourage us to be creative was a way of transforming her own sort of quiet, the quieting of her own creative spirit. So I was born in 54. I'm the oldest. My dad was a construction worker and then eventually had a break and became a union leader
Oh,
in
wow.
the road builders union.
Mhm.
And my mom was um, um, New York City Irish immigrant family, and they were poor. And both sides were poor, and then basically her father died at 17, which allowed her mother, who's very formal and old school, to permit my mom to go on the road with a show that was called the Broadway to Hollywood Review, which was a can show basically. But it was a big outfit, with maybe sort of 30 people on stage at any one time. And they traveled with the carnival. And they were there, the Normans was the outfit, and they were a very respected carnival theatrical outfit. They were, they were titillating in the sense that they lifted their skirts slightly higher, but it wasn't a strip show necessarily, but it was the burlesque of its time.
Right. Yeah.
And then my mom was courted by my dad while she was on the road, and then they became partners, and I was the first. And so that's the background. And when the carnival would come to town, all of those people would come through our house and visit my mom, even though she was no
Oh,
longer
wow.
with the carnival. So I had that kind of energy growing up.
That's really cool.
Oh, and they would let us put plays on in the cellar. So that's where I kind of had
Oh,
you know, the
wow.
directorial thing going on.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's fantastic. Do you have images or pictures of that time
A
period?
few, yeah, I do. When I do a slide talk, I usually show this one that's kind of hilarious because I think it's the moment where the influences of my father, which was the politicization through his union politics, and then the theatrical influences of my mom came together. And what happened was we were doing one of those evenings in the cellar where us kids were playing in the drag costume box. And we decided we were going to make placards because I wanted to be transferred from uh, an all boy Catholic high school, which was zero creativity, to the
Mm.
public school where all my friends were. And that was where I ended up meeting that mentor and several teachers that were very influential. And we all us kids got dressed up in the costumes, and we all had placards, "Send Danny to Kennedy High School." And I inadvertently put on a little tutu, so there I am in a little tutu with a placard, so it's like the best of both worlds. And the signage was just so funny. It was like, and so I don't know, we have a couple shots like that in the car.
Do you think those, images, inspired you to become a photographer, or what inspired you? At what point did you know that you wanted to photograph the world?
Yeah. Well, I did wanna do film, and that
Oh,
was
that's right,
actually what
film.
I was, yeah, and
Yeah.
really because of the yearbook and then shooting a few of the weddings of our family and friends,
Mm.
I knew about still photography, and then eventually it eclipsed the filmmaking, as the sort of dominant medium. And then really kinda my 2nd year of college, I'm on the path I'm on the path to, make, serious images, serious still images. Yeah. But I think, when you grow up with a lot of instamatics,
Mm.
in your childhood, it's sort of automatic. You're kind of understanding the role of photography in sociology, and it kind of gets into your skin
Mhm.
as a desirable, even though you might not necessarily pursue a career in photography by that point.
Well, okay, thank you, Danny. I think we're running out of time, so
Take good care, dear. Okay.